We learn what is exposure, and in this video, we will learn how to change and how to manipulate exposure in Lightroom. To find the exposure sliders or settings that are directly involved in exposure in Lightroom, go to Basic Panel and the Tone section. And here the first slider is called Exposure. And we know that exposure is how dark or how bright your image appears. So when we go to the negative point or the negative side, our image looks much more darker. And when we go to the plus side, we increase the exposure and our image is much more brighter. And the second slider in here is contrast. What is contrast? Contrast is the difference between the bright and the dark spots of our image, or the difference between darkest and the brightest part of our image. And we see in here that these areas are considered darker, and these areas we can consider them as brighter areas. So if we increase the contrast, their difference is increased. This area gets darker and this area gets, we can say that the contrast darkens the dark parts and brighten the bright parts of our image, as we are seeing in here. When we go to the 100 plus 100, the bright areas are exaggerated and also the dark parts are getting darker. In the same way, if you go to the negative part, we will be decreasing the difference between darkest and brightest part of our image. And our image will look dusty, or we can say foggier. And here we have these other four sliders, which is highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks. What is highlights? Highlight this slider, when we go to the left part, recovers details from the brightest part of our image. As we are seeing in here, when it's 0, this area is completely white and we don't see any details in here. But if we decrease the highlights, we will be recovering so much details in here. And in the same way, if we go to the plus side, or if we increase the highlights, we will be brightening or increasing the brightness of that area. Similarly, shadows, when we go to the negative side, we will be decreasing the shadows, or we will be decreasing the brightness of the darkest areas. What I mean is that we will be decreasing or darkening the dark parts of our image, as we are seeing in here. And similarly, if we go to the plus side, we will be adding brightness to the darkest area of our image. This is useful for when we take underexposed photos and we want to recover the details from that images. We can do that by the sliders. The next slider is whites. Whites also affects the bright part of our image. So what is the difference between highlight and whites? Whites is used to define the truest white in our image, and the difference is that highlights if we want to recover the details from the brightest part of our image, and the whites is used to define true white in our image. And also the highlights only affects the brightest part of our image, but the whites also affects all the tones that are in our image. And this, it is not, the effects are not visible in this image. I will show you another example in a few bits. Similar to whites, another slider is blacks. Blacks is used to define the truest black in our image, or is used to decrease the blacks, or is used to decrease the level of blacks in our image. As you see that in the default, these blacks are not true black. So if we go to the negative side, we will be adding darkness and these bars looks completely black. Similarly, if we go to the plus side, just like shadows, we will be increasing the values of black our image. As you might know that the images are stored as numbers. All of this area has number values from 0 to 255. 255 is when there is no details and it is white, and 0 is when there is no details and it's black. So in a way, it will be adding 0, or it will be adding to 0. If you go to the right side, it will change from 0 to 1, 2, 3, or if it is already 10, it will be 15, 20, and just like that. With the combination of these tools, we can control and we can fix all of the exposure areas, or all of the midtones, highlight, and shadows of our image, and change it in every way that we want. Or just like other parts of Lightroom, it has an auto feature in here. What it does is it automatically analyzes your image and makes the necessary adjustments. For example, for this photo or this one, if we take the auto, it will automatically analyze the image for us, and it will make the necessary adjustments in the exposure, as you are seeing in here. You can see that before and after. It added the details in the highlights. We see that the highlights is -81. It increased the shadows, add the details in the dark areas. just like this, and whites to get this, to get the brightness of the sun from here, also the black to make them pop and have a add a contrast in it. So by keeping in mind what slider does which work and where to use them, you can use them to fix all of your photos. For example, we say that highlights used to recover details in the brightest part of our image. In this area, the sky is very bright and there's no details in here. So what we do is we decrease the highlights and we see that the details here in the sky, we can see the clouds. And also we learned that shadows is used to recover details from the dark, from the less exposed area of our image. In this image, the area that is our subject, it is darker. So we need to increase the shadows to get details in there. And blacks, we say that it used to define true black in our image. So we want to add contrast in our image and we will decrease the blacks to add a contrast in here. Similarly, we said that the whites affects all tones of our image and we can see that in here. When we increase or decrease it, all of the tones in our image here and also the bright parts are affected. So while using the whites slider, be careful because it affects all the tones in our image. In this image, it looks better to leave it -90. And we want to add a little bit slider, contrast slider, and decrease a little bit of overall bright exposure. And yeah, here is the before and here is the after of our image, and we have much more details in the sky and also details in the where the subject of our photo is located. We will be working with these sliders a lot in this course and you will learn every details about them in the next lectures. So if you have any questions about the definition of the sliders or what it does, each of them, make sure to leave your questions in the Q&A section. I will be happy to answer them. In the next lecture, we will be covering another important tool and probably the most used tool in Lightroom, which is Curve tool, to fix exposure. And also we will learn how to add colors with the tone curve. And yeah, see you in the next lecture.